Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Hot Politics Lab. For a long period of time, this was the online Hot Politics Lab, but I guess by now we should say it's the hybrid Hot Politics Lab, because we have today a speaker that's joining us online, as well as a speaker that's joining us at the University of Amsterdam, while I am still in my cozy room in Hilversum. So welcome today. My name is Bert Bakker. We have two exciting presentations. Things change, right? It's hybrid, but other things don't change. It's the last Friday of the month, and that's the Friday that we allow graduate students or students in general to present some of their work. And I'm happy to see that both people came to Amsterdam or joined us online for what I think will be two exciting presentations. The first presentation will be by Paul Stroet, who is a PhD candidate at the Vrije Universiteit at the University of Free University of Amsterdam, which is opposite of the University of Amsterdam, our rival, but that does not prevent us from inviting people that do interesting work to present their work here. And Paul is doing really interesting work. He's using fancy statistics, as he just told me, to try to predict personality out of parliamentary speeches, in particular Big Five personality traits. And Paul, I'm really excited about what you will tell today. So the floor is yours. Remember, if you're new here today or if you're old, type your questions in the Q&A box if you're listening in online, and Gijs will moderate the discussion with both the people in Amsterdam as well as the people that joined via Zoom. So Paul, the floor is yours. So now we're going over to our next speaker, who is physically present at the University of Amsterdam. It's Dani Komáromy. He is a master's student at the Department of Communication Science and also works at our methods desk, where he's consulting students with basic and more advanced statistical questions. And Dani has also just completed his master in social psychology, and the work he is presenting today is based on that master thesis. Christian, we only see that you started sharing your screen, but we don't see any content.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And is it? Yeah, works.
So thank you for having me here. Yeah, apparently it's a few days before, because I will just present my master thesis from the field. And it's basically about, so it is designing an intervention that can mobilize people to collectively act against climate change. And as shown here, the impact of individual or private sphere behavior is basically incomparable to that of political and economic elites. So in my intervention, I didn't really focus on how to decrease household carbon footprint, but I took a rather anti-elitist, or let's say populist view or stance. So in my thesis, I tried to not.
I see it in the Zoom.
I see it.
Yeah, just continue.
Okay, so I investigated whether populist discourse that has been shown, or that has proved that its rhetoric has a has an enormous mobilizing potential, can used or could be used to induce environmental collective action, mainly through increasing environmental identity and collective emotion and efficacy beliefs. And I conducted both a content analysis and an experiment. So basically, the dichotomous way populists construct the society generates a relative deprivation among the people, power disparities. So basically, populist discourse constructs social identity among the people. And specific. I created 3 different types of populist frames. So where people, actors or people words were present, and it had a positive sentiment, that sentence was coded as people-centrism, negative, and elite actor was anti-elitism. And when a sentence contained both types of actors, it was an antagonistic frame. I used also a dictionary-based approach to collect emotion words, so basically fear, anger, and hope-related words, and I controlled for several other variables that had been previously linked to retweeting behavior. What I found is that populist frames, but mostly people-centrism, so in-group favoritist frames were linked to retweeting behavior. And I also found that that these two frames, so anti-elitism and people-centrism, mediated the effect of the positive effect of hope and the negative effect of fear on retweeting behavior. So the main finding here is that mostly positive frames were related to mobilization, although antagonism, that was also related to anger, was insignificant, probably because of the low proportion in the sample. So next, I conducted an experiment in the UK on prolific. I had a quite unbalanced sample, but later I accounted for it. But I didn't understand how it could, yeah, whatever. What I did is that participants were presented either a populist or a pluralist framing of climate change, but the two texts follow the same emotional flow. So this fear, anger, and hope or efficacy. So the fear appeal was the same in both conditions. The anger one, in the pluralist one, blamed basically all members of all strata of the society, whereas in the populist one only the elites. And finally, the efficacy or hope appeal was in the pluralist, it put hope in green technologies and government policies and market mechanisms, whereas the populist one proposed a quite radical change, system change based on wide participation and really strict environmental policies. Among the measures, due to time constraint, I will talk only about the manipulation check. So I had two. The first one measured the agreement with elite blame, so that the elites are responsible for climate change. And the second one assessed the agreement with the statement that economic system changes is necessary in order to tackle or to mitigate climate change. Whereas the first one was significantly higher in the populist condition, the second one was not significantly different between the two groups. Accordingly, only moral outrage was different between the two groups. Sorry for the small p values, but yeah, only moral outrage was higher in the populist condition. Collective efficacy didn't differ. Consequently, collective identity was only slightly higher in the populist than in the pluralist frame, and it didn't lead to higher normative collective action. Yeah, because I forgot to mention that I measured both normative and non-normative collective action, and it might be explained in an emotion regulation framework. So people engaged mostly in emotion-focused coping, so they started to blame the responsible, but they didn't engage in problem-focused coping, so they couldn't marshal their resources in order to tackle the problem because they didn't find this proposed system change either desirable or feasible. So after these insignificant results, I conducted a exploratory analysis, and it is a partial correlation network. So basically what you can see here is the association between each pair of variables after partialing out the effect of any other two. So for example, here you can see that the populist condition compared to the pluralist one generated anger and moral outrage that was mainly through fear and sadness related to collective identity or environmental identity, mostly among those people who score higher or environmental attitudes. So these are the negative emotions, and here you can see the positive emotions that may be more important. So we can see here that the populist appeal increased pride. Furthermore, after controlling for all other variables, the hope was lower in the populist appeal. So pride seems to be the crucial emotion here that is directly related to non-normative collective action. So maybe people felt proud of their acts. And through enthusiasm, it was related to collective efficacy as well. So to wrap it up, the experiment had mostly null findings. It generated collective outrage, so a sort of emotion-based coping mechanism, but it was not an adaptive coping, so it didn't lead to approach motivation, probably because of the lack of efficacy generation. So as I measured the agreement with the text in both conditions, I could see that there was no significant difference between the two conditions. So the populist system change was not less desirable, but probably it was less feasible, or people perceived it less feasible. And it can be mirrored here on the generally low level of hope in both pre and post exposure. It is really, one of the main findings here is the role of positive emotions that is larger or more serious than the negative ones, probably, or as serious. But as opposed to my hope-focused hypothesis, pride is more important. And here on the left-hand side, you can see, as I measured the prior participation in the movement, that pride is not related to this participation. So people didn't feel proud only because of their own achievement, but probably they felt proud because of other people's achievement who they identify with. The practical implications, so first of all, positive emotions may be crucial in building collective efficacy in populist environmental mobilization, and that in-group favoritism may replace out-group derogation, so pride appeals instead of outrage appeals. That may be important because it doesn't lead to that high effective polarization. As for the theoretical implications, green populism, just as other left-wing populism, is rather inclusive as opposed to most right-wing populist appeals or ideologies that exclude vertical outgroups. And as Samuel and von Schewe probably says, so they found that there is a different emotion regulation strategy between left and right-wing people, because whereas right-wing people or right-wing populists tend to repress their negative emotions, that leads to less realistic perception of the social reality. Left-wing people try to accept or acknowledge their negative feelings collectively. That not only leads to more positive collective emotions, but also more realistic perception of power structures. So, of course, the study had several limitations. So, first of all, collective emotions were measured, but it's somewhere between individual and collective emotions. So, network models would be more appropriate to measure them. It was a one-time exposure in an experiment, whereas collective identification and emotional norms are more long-term processes. And both the emotion detection and the populist frame detection might be better with deep learning models. As I said, the sample was quite unbalanced, but I resampled in order to have balanced gender distribution, and I didn't get really different results. As for the strength of the study, it is, as far as I know, it is the first one that tests the populism social identity link in a quantitative manner. It also contributes to scarce literature of the pro-social populism, as well as the populism social movement mobilization link literature, and it increased both external and internal validity with this multi-method approach. And finally, with the deductive, inductive, so the confirmatory, explanatory analysis, it generated novel research questions. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Great, thank you, Dani. Very impressive to have a multi-study master thesis. I mean, I'm very jealous of that. Okay, so we'll have the same order as before. So if you have a question, write it into the Q&A box. The people here in the room, they can just gently tap me on the shoulder and I'll give them the floor. Maybe just a question for clarification from my side. I think that was about the period that one laptop died and you had to move a little bit to improve the audio, and and I accidentally pressed the mute button for 5 seconds. Can you actually show us the treatments, the pluralism versus populism treatments?
Yes. So the first, yeah.
Oh well, yeah. Oh,
so the first one, the fear appeal was the same in the two conditions,
yeah.
and the second one is the anger, and the third paragraph is the hope efficacy.
Okay, but you also, and maybe that's even before this, you showed us a difference between pluralism and populism.
Yeah. So the first one is the let's say pluralist appeal. So it doesn't it blames everyone, and it takes a rather centrist or liberal whatever stance, so that we can solve the problem within this system with government policies, with taxes, everything is going fine, or it will be with solar panels and so on. Whereas the other one is a more radical change.
And who is blamed in the populist?
The populists, the elites.
Financial elites.
Well, political and financial elites risk our lives.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Now this, I mean, is a very relevant question because Bert, Matthijs and I were just discussing this week yet again, what is the effective anti-populist frame? And clearly it's not this frame. That's what your study shows. Right?
Anti-populist meaning?
Yeah, well, in this case, you chose a pluralist frame, but you could, of course,
But what is anti-populist, like elitist?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, but what is that? What is that type of frame? It's not a frame that is typically used in communication, I think. So,
Right.
What we came up with just sounds very silly. That's also what our respondents felt.
Well, I would say because it's against the people, so it's really difficult to phrase something that there are the elites, they are smart because you are sort of dumb, so we will just lead you. So I think it's not. Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's a conducive to mobilization or to vote generation.
But that would point to a general problem with countering populist frames.
Mm-hmm.
I'll stop talking and give the floor to Leonard.
Yeah, very ambitious project. Thank you very much for presenting it. Can you tell us a little bit more about your country selection? Why you decided on these? I think 2 countries.
Yes. So I chose first of all UK because of the extension rebellion that is really prevalent there, and I just wanted to include another country, and I found that in the US it wasn't so English-speaking country because of language barriers. I found that in the US and in Australia the Twitter accounts are not really so there is not a big content generation. So this is why I chose Canada. It was rather, quantity laden choice.
And given your knowledge now after your project, what would you expect in other countries? Do you think these results can travel to other countries as well, and you would expect similar results?
I would, but yeah, I didn't really find any serious differences between the 2 countries. Well, I didn't really look for them, but I didn't see much. I did like fixed effects and standard errors, so like robust standard errors. But before that I looked into the data and it wasn't really different. So based on this, maybe there might not be huge differences.
Okay. Other questions? Matthijs?
Yeah. Thanks, very interesting presentation. I was wondering if an interest group or a social movement asks you to advise them, give them advice regarding their communication. What would you tell them? Would it be a good idea to use people-centrism, anti-elitism, antagonism? What would you tell them what they should do
Well, I
to get
would
the message across.
Sure. I would say that beyond the anti-elitist messages, they really have to construct pride. So what I found is that those messages that proudly talk about prior successes and that are close enough in terms of in time to generate enthusiasm, that is pretty mobilizing emotion according to the effective intelligence model and so on. So I would recommend to include pride appeals because it is really crucial, and to focus on efficacy messages because they might be more important than only anti-elitist frames, because with just being angry you might not see any proposed or any feasible solution.
Yeah, which is pretty interesting because, of course, in most of the populism literature, it's about people-centrism and anti-elitism, right? But most often the emphasis is on the anti-elitism part, right? The negative anger part instead of the hope people-centrism part. And it's interesting to see here that in this specific context, it might just well be the other way around.
I would say that it's so this paper was super interesting, comparing the left and right wing. So they populism, and they found that this pride appeals are rather collective narcissism appeals, or so in the right wing populism literature. And as populism literature is really skewed towards right wing populism because of the social reality or political reality, I would say that these positive emotions are more related to left wing politics, and negative emotions might be more related to right wing politics. Yeah, this is what I found.
Yeah, but still, I agree. But what is interesting when you look at left-wing populism, for instance, it's much more inclusive than right-wing populism, right? But it has a very strong anti-elitism component still. But here, maybe it's the anti-elitism component is less strong or less.
I wouldn't say that. I would just say that relatively less strong. So here you can see that anger and moral outrage are really strong, and they lead to identification. So if you are angry, you feel more threatened, and if you feel more threatened, it's like a terror management theory predicts that you tend to identify with groups, but you know only what to do or how to what to do against your relative deprivation only if you see prior examples, for example, so if you feel the proud, which means I would say that prior successes.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and that's Bert.
Yes, Dani. Thanks. So, what is now, in terms of, according to you, the main finding of the paper? Because I'm a little puzzled that here you basically move into the observational world where a lot of things are correlated with each other, but they're not causing each other because, we just, I just, at least how I see it, we just can never know, right? Is the correct interpretation of the paper that this populist message around the environment is causing moral outrage, but not a lot of these other things, who might be then correlated with each other, but that's not because of the populist treatment? Or do I need to see this differently?
So causality can be seen in the direct neighbors of the manipulation. But this paper, so it is I don't know if you know Sasha Epskamp, he's from the psychology department, and he wrote quite a lot of papers about these partial correlation network estimations. So what this group of mathematicians and psychologists say is that if there is no omitted variable, then if there is one variable between these two, then it mediates the effect. So so it may be either that pride causes both enthusiasm and the manipulation, or manipulation causes pride that causes enthusiasm, or enthusiasm causes pride and that causes the manipulation. So as there is an experimental manipulation here, and we can see that it increased pride, so we know that it's a causal effect, then we know that between pride and efficacy, there is only enthusiasm. So it's interesting.
Yeah, but that's, I don't, but you're now controlling for things that are measured post-treatment, right? Like yes, there's, so what I don't understand with this strategy is, yeah, you control for things post-treatment that are correlated with each other, and then say, but then the treatment effect appears, right? So because your first graph was basically, there's only, if we just look at the difference between populist and non-populist, there's basically a difference on moral outrage. And that I thought were the clean main effects of the experiment, right?
Yes,
like
it's here as well.
Sorry?
Manipulation caused moral outrage, mainly mediated by anger.
Yeah, okay. Well, I have to read that work, but yeah, I'm not familiar with it. But it's interesting. Thanks. And I want to also echo what Gijs said. I think it's super impressive to have a two study master thesis. I occasionally steer students in that direction, and that not always ends up very well, or that just ends up badly. If they're listening, I'm obviously to blame as their advisor, but yeah, it is. Doing rigorous work in a couple months is really difficult, and I think doing 2 good studies in a couple months is really impressive. So thanks, Dani, and I look forward to seeing what you'll do in also it's your internship in the Hot Politics Lab in the coming months. So that said, we have an exciting set of speakers in the coming weeks. So next week, October 1st, we have Henk van der Kolk from the University of Twente, who will talk about whether or not populist attitudes are really something different than things like distrust, efficacy, and cynicism. A paper that I'm really really excited about that somebody is finally writing, because my sense is that it's not so much different, but we'll see. Then we have Hugo Mercier from Sciences Po Paris on October 8th, who will talk about his book, Not Born Yesterday, Why Humans Are Less Gullible Than We Think. In the weeks after, we have Chris Lucas from Washington University. On next October 22nd, we have Isabella Rebasso and Leonard Sherman. On October 29th, Alan Sanfi, who's a professor of neuroscience. And in the weeks after, we have people like Hannah Naam from Stony Brook, Jamie Settle from the College of William and Mary, Leonie Huddy from Stony Brook, and Frederik Hopp from Oscor. So I think plenty of reasons to either show up on Friday afternoon between 3 and 4, or to watch these talks at a later point in time. But obviously it's the best to just show up in person. Once more, Dani and Paul, thanks for doing this exciting work. We learned from students, and I definitely am inspired by what I've seen today. So I wish you all a pleasant weekend, and see you next week. And Gijs wants to indicate that people that are in the proximity of the University of Amsterdam can join him for alcoholic, or I should say non-alcoholic drink at Crea Cafe. All right, see you later.
See you.
See you.
Bye.